Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. This is your host, Adam Schrader, along with Naresh Vissa. We are once again joined by Dan Millman, author of The Life You Were Born to Live, a guide to finding your life and purpose. He was with us for our last episode, and he'll be with us again for our next episode. And today we're going to talk about how to find your true career. So one thing you hear people say a lot is, and Naresh was touching on it, but some people just say, if you don't wake up in the morning thrilled to go to work, if you're not loving what you're doing, don't do it. And I say to that, kind of, but if you really love to paint and it's not going to pay for your lifestyle, but then maybe being a painter isn't for you. What do you have to say to those people who don't necessarily love what they're doing, but they're probably a W-2 employee or something of that nature? What are your thoughts on how they can kind of find their purpose, even if they have to stick with a job right now that they don't love?
Yeah, well, in one of my books, Adam, called The Four Purposes of Life, in the second purpose in that book is finding your career and calling. And I differentiate the two. And it makes a lot of clarity for people, I think, who get them confused. When we're told, do what you love and the money will follow, well, maybe that would be the ideal. I once told my daughters when they were younger, do what you love and get someone to pay you for it. But in a sense, that's maybe a bit idealistic. Not everybody is going to do what they love. Newsflash, we don't have to love our work. I think we need work that's suitable to our talents, values, and interests, that gives us some meaning, but also produces an income. Because work, our career, is about producing an income. It's one of the most fundamental shifts or fundamental areas of life. Ever since humans interacted, they were bartering, exchanging services or goods, and that became the world of business. And so we work to produce an income for ourselves, our families, and that's just a foundational element of life. Even people who are independently wealthy still do something. I know a lady who's a multimillionaire, but she works in a small bookstore, or did until recently with the pandemic and so on, because she loves books and helping people find books that they might like, because that connects us to people. So but primarily it's about making an income, our career. Even if we love the people we work with, and it's because if we weren't getting paid anything, most of us would have to find something else. Whereas calling, when we talk about doing what we love, that's our calling. That's our hobby. That's our avocation. And you don't necessarily make any money on your calling. It could be playing guitar or magic or stamp collecting or playing chess. Some people get so good at their calling that they're able to actually turn it into a career. My calling and career happen to be the same. And how do you know? How does someone know if their calling and career are the same? Easy. If you won the lottery, would you continue to do it? And if you would, it's also a calling. And there's nothing wrong with just finding work that's suitable, that is appropriate, but we don't have to love every aspect of it. I think that's a fallacy, and it's kind of crazy making. I like my work, but I don't love it. Maybe I should do something else. Work is that's what we call it, work. We go to it. We trade our time, our energy, our expertise and experience for an income. But the calling is important too. And there are starving artists who feel committed to doing their calling. Meanwhile, they're living in their parents' basement in their 30s because they just are unable constitutionally to do anything but what they feel they love. And yet, if they got a day job, they might find some independence, an income of their own, even more self-respect. And in their discretionary time, they can work on their calling and their skills. And there are also people who are really immersed in their career, making good money, but they've abandoned a hobby, something that they really loved when they were younger that could enrich their life as well. So I think it's important to recognize both. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're two separate and distinct areas. But that's how I would clarify and hopefully respond to that question.
Yeah, it was a really, really good kind of distinction between career and calling because they are really two different things. And now that I think about it in my own personal life, certainly I think I can communicate what my calling is, which is very different from what my career is. So definitely thanks for that. Now, in your book, you have a mysterious system that helps people reveal their hidden calling. Is that different from what you just said, or does that system go into more detail on how people can find their hidden calling?
Well, I do go into calling more and how to find that and clarify it, let's say, in the four purposes of life. But in the big major reference book, The Life You Were Born to Live, which I guess there are about 2 million readers so far around the world, because the book is unusually accurate. That is dealing with more of a hidden calling. It's when I say it's mysterious, the system is mysterious. I like to think of it not as irrational, but it's transrational. It's it's an objective method for working with the date of birth. And some people might roll their eyes, go, "Oh, are you talking about numerology?" And let me say that I've never been interested in numerology. I glanced at a few books in bookstores years ago, and they seemed vague and abstract and just kind of confusing. Maybe 50% accurate, 40% accurate. But I worked with a rather unusual mentor, again, who I'm writing about right now in this new project, and he revealed a system. I call it the life purpose system for clarifying our life path, which is a hidden calling. It's much broader than a hobby or way we'd like to spend our discretionary time or career. It is what we need to actually feel fulfilled. And many people who have a good career and maybe a good hobby they like, there's something they wonder if they're actually doing. They're missing something, and it has to do with this hidden calling. For some people, it has to do with fully manifesting their creativity. They've got a drive. They need to create. They don't just want, they need to create to feel on track and fulfilled. For other people, it has to do with cooperation with other people and supporting other people, that feeling. For others, it's expressing themselves or helping other people to express. It's all about creative expression. And for other people, it's establishing a stability in their life, solid foundations. For others, it's about independence or freedom. For others, it's about vision. They're the visionaries, and it's about high standards. And for still others, it's about self-trust. Or for some people, their life path involves a need to influence other people's, which applies to me. For others, it's about finding higher wisdom and living as a good example, and so on. So that gives you a flavor for what I mean by our hidden calling. Someone can have a good career. For example, one person I once counseled, I could see, and there's a way to do that in the book, it explains it. I could see that her life was all about bringing her full creative energy to the fore. And I asked her what she did for a living, and she said, "I work for the IRS." Now, it's possible there are people she deals with who she audits who are quite creative in their bookkeeping, but her job was not particularly creative. And she just happened to be way overweight. It's like blocked creative energy. And she came to me because she really wasn't very happy. So maybe it wasn't the best career for her. So she needed to do something, whether it's and creativity doesn't just mean working in the arts or singing or dancing or making movies. It could be creativity in business. You can be very creative in troubleshooting and generating ideas, entrepreneurship, and so on. So it manifests. You can be a very creative teacher or doctor. So it crosses lines of what we do for a career. That's just one example in terms of one life path. So that I think that may give you a flavor for what I meant by this hidden calling. And many people never clarify that their whole life. I mean, it changed my life when this particular mentor of mine did a reading for me. And I said, how can you know this? Are you a psychic? And he said, no, I'm not a psychic. I've been trained to know where to look. Well, eventually he trained me to know where to look. And I've trained many other people. And it's all there in the life you were born to live. And so people can actually find out objectively without doing a quiz or answering a questionnaire. They can see right in their face their hidden calling. And by the way, any of your listeners, it's free. They can go to my website, peacefulwarrior.com, and the first thing they'll see is a life purpose calculator. And they can just fill out their date of birth, and they'll get a taste. They'll get a number, and they'll get some key words for their life path. It's only a little bit of information. There's much more in the book, but it gives a flavor, a taste, a sample of what they're here to do. So that's readily accessible and available to anyone for free.
Well, sticking to the topic of creativity, right now, even though the economy is opening back up, people are trying to get out. A lot of people are still afraid, especially the immunocompromised, and just kind of the hysteria in general has made all of us afraid to go back outside and mingle with people and to go back to parties and events. So being kind of still locked down at home, it's looking like this trend is going to continue for the foreseeable future. How can people become more creative? What are your tips on becoming more creative while at home?
Yeah, in the book you mentioned, The Creative Compass, written by my daughter and myself, one of the points we have in that book applies to writing, but every other area of life, which is constraints breed creativity. Once we have a constraint, we have to become more creative. One example in the writing area is someone can write poetry. Most people can sit down and write some poetical, a few lines of what they consider poetry. But what if there are challenges to write haiku poetry, the Japanese style poetry, in which you have to have exactly 17 syllables in your poem. It's a short poem, exactly 3 lines, 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second, and 5 syllables in the third line. Now that is a constraint, but I'll tell you, you can't not get very creative in doing that. So that's one example of one kind of constraint that breeds creativity. Now, when people talk about the pandemic and lockdown and sheltering in, to me it has nothing to do with fear, except the idea of fear as respect, like God-fearing or awe-inspiring. This is a big deal, a worldwide pandemic. It can kill people, and those who doesn't kill, it can create some long-term problems. So we need to respect it. Fear isn't necessarily helpful, but it's also totally natural. I mean, I'm definitely in the risk group because I'm 74 years old now. So I have to be very careful, and I'm following all protocols, and that's what anybody intelligent person should do. Whether it's difficult or not. This is a marathon. Marathons are tough to run, but you're in it for the long haul. But if somebody starts running a marathon and they think it's only a 100-yard dash, then they go, okay, I'm done. And that's what's happening all over the place. We have to pace ourselves and just be intelligent. I don't want to catch this disease, and I'll do what I can not to do so. It's not because I'm terrified of it, but it's obviously something I'd like to avoid, just as we might go to a jungle and take precautions in terms of snakes or mosquitoes or whatever. So a little fear in that area is probably a good thing. So the constraints of being home more. My daughter and son-in-law are home with 3 children, ages 7, 4, and 1. I think parents out there can appreciate that. The challenges they have. And she's going to school, getting an MA. He's working from home. So those are constraints. And they're making the best they can of it. And that's really what we're here to do, is to make the best we can of a given situation. But we need to pace ourselves until there's a vaccine. Hopefully there will be. Until there's a vaccine, we need to take care and precautions and be intelligent. And it's an adversity, and I've never seen an adversity that doesn't make us a little wiser and a little stronger. We may look back on this a couple of years from now and go, wow, look at how society has changed. All the things that are in our face right now that we might have ignored or brushed off, we can't avoid. So we are learning so much in every arena of life right now. So, it's like good luck, bad luck. It seems like a bad thing, and it certainly is for those who've lost loved ones or died. But for the rest of us, we may get great benefits looking back on this time.
So, in terms of people who are locked down right now, if you are at home right now and you realize you've read your book or taken that survey that you have, and they realize, okay, my calling is this, but it's one of the callings that I'm not going to be able to make my living off of. So it's just going to be something that I do on the side. But I'm also realizing during this time that maybe I have a job that isn't a work from home job. And we talked about burnout a little bit. So you're burnt out, you're wanting a career change. How do you find how do you help people figure out when, if you're older, it can be trickier. How do you find out when it's the right time to shift careers? Do you have any recommendations on that?
Well, what I do is I remind people of what they already know but tend to forget, and I offer principles, perspectives, and practices. And I think one perspective, maybe a practice I can offer in terms of burnout is vacations. Now, you may be laughing or, what do you mean vacations? Today? I don't mean traditional vacations. I mean doing something different from what we already do, taking a break, even if that's 1 hour a day or half an hour a day, 15 minutes saying, this is my time. And we do that. We either we stream a video or we take a nap or go for a walk in the woods. The Japanese call it forest bathing. Can be really healing. And a little bit of something is better than a lot of nothing. So we can make good use of our time and help combat the burnout. I learned a valuable lesson once, Adam. I was working, this is years ago, I was working as an administrative position in a business office of a bodywork school. And I was doing paperwork and calling people to try to get models for students of this bodywork school. And I was really stressed. I mean, I could feel the pressure rising up to my head, maybe a headache coming on, maybe blood pressure rising, and just my breathing was shallow. And I happened to glance out the window just for a moment, and I saw a cloud drifting across the sky. And I found myself taking a deep breath, shaking loose. And I noticed that cloud wasn't racing the wind, trying to get ahead of it or dawdling behind. It was just going with the wind. And it calmed my whole body down. It was like an instant meditation. And I went back and made the phone calls and filled out the forms at a reasonable, relaxed pace, breathing and so on. And I got it all done. And many times we're like that person, all stressed out, when we really don't need to be. When I was a young coach, I walked into the gym one day, and I saw one of the team members lying on his back. Gymnasts have to be flexible. And he was lying on his back, pulling one straight leg toward his chest. And he was stretching it way past 90, almost touching his chest with the straight leg, like almost the splits. But he was muttering to himself, saying, "Oh, this hurts so much. I hate this." And I turned to him and I said, "Brian, who's doing it to you?" It's like I walked into a Mel Brooks movie. It was like, nobody took possession of him. Some of us live like that. Who's doing it to you? And that's how burnout happens. So burnout is not necessary. It's just a habit of overdoing it, where we're always on this sprint. We're always at the edge of pain. When I first started running, when I was a young coach, I was getting out of shape. I wasn't training for sport anymore. And I got winded running like 50 yards. And I went, what's going on? So I started running. And I was always hard. It always hurt. And one day some people asked me, why don't you come run jogging with us? And I ran with them and I went, you mean this is your pace? We were talking and having a great time. And I never realized you could actually kind of relax and run. I was always on the edge pushing. And so I found a kind of balance. So burnout doesn't mean you're in the wrong career. It just may mean you've got this habitual overdrive. And there was one author I read once. He said it's better to go 80%, not 100%. You have fewer injuries, you enjoy it more, and you still get the results you want. It just takes a little longer. And that made a lot of sense to me. And it's a good way to live, I think, not this whole 100% rhetoric. And by the way, those hidden callings I mentioned about creativity or cooperation or expression and so on, you don't have to do a career that's all about that. One can learn to express themselves in positive ways at home, in their family, or with friends. You don't have to have a career that's public speaking, for example, though that could be appropriate. So I think that's what came up for me in response to your question, and I think it was a good one.
Yeah, I think we've talked about careers and callings quite a bit, but how can we apply kind of these same principles to our relationships? How can we make wiser decisions in our relationships with our spouses, our children, our families?
Wow. Well, again, I remind you again of what I said about self-knowledge, making the right decisions for the right person. And the more we know ourselves, the better we choose. And it's also going in with a realistic estimation. You know, this whole idea of having a soulmate or the perfect occupation, perfect career, or the perfect relationship. I don't know if that exists, but I do believe that you can make a life, you can build a life with many people. You know, some relationships are so comfortable. They pick somebody that's so suitable and comfortable for them, like a mirror image. They're so compatible that there's never any friction, and there's not a lot of growth. They agree with each other all the time. They don't really have arguments, so they don't learn how to argue or negotiate. Their lives aren't necessarily that enriched. It's like marrying an image of yourself. Though it may be comfortable. Other people, oh my goodness, they marry somebody who is just so different. It's the opposites attract kind of thing, that they are constantly negotiating and having different points of view. They learn a lot about themselves, and they develop a lot of skills too in relationship over time if they stay together. But they again, the friction can be exhausting, and they're always working on the relationship. So maybe the balance somewhere in between. My wife and I have that. We've been together 44 years, and she's my best friend and guardian angel. But sometimes we butt heads. So I think we need to appreciate that people should and do argue sometimes. You need to argue skillfully and well. So I think being realistic about relationships or kids, you know, the best thing about going to college, I like to remind people, is that you find out it doesn't make you happy. But there are people who never went to college, and they go, if only I'd gone to college, I'd be happy. If only I married my soulmate, I'd be happy. Or if only I had a better relationship even, I'd be happy. If only I'd had children, I'd be happy. If only I hadn't had children, I'd be happy. If only I made more money, I'd be happy. If only I went on vacations, I'd be happy. If only I retired, then I'll be happy. It's endless if onlys. But at some point we realize happiness is a practice. It's what we bring to life. It's not just to feel good. We can't control feelings that change like the weather all the time. But we can control what we do. We can radiate a sense of happiness to other people, and passion and enthusiasm and life, and give that as a fundamental life skill. And that's a different idea than most people have. They're waiting to feel happy, waiting for someone to fulfill them. So, you learn a lot about yourself in relationships. How many of us haven't learned something that maybe we'd rather not see, but we have seen something in terms of a relationship difficulty? And you learn about yourself, your shadow side, and you become more human, more authentic. So relationships are a practice, are a discipline, in my view, and a loving one, and it can be very fulfilling. That's my experience. Now, by the way, I was married for 8 years and divorced, so I know what that's like too. But we've been together now, Joy and I, for many, decades. So I've seen life from both sides.
Thanks for joining us for this episode, Dan. We'll be back with you again on Friday when we come back. And once again, people, don't forget to check out Dan's website, peacefulwarrior.com. That's peacefulwarrior.com. Dan, thank you so much for giving your time with us today. And everybody, until next time, keep on working from home.